My fiancé hid that he had a son with my stepsister for 4 years. She revealed it at our engagement party. And what happened next left everyone broken. I'm 27 years old. I work in digital marketing, and honestly, I still can't believe my life turned into this. 6 months ago, I was planning my wedding, excited about my future with the man I loved, and now I'm here, single, living in an apartment I can barely afford, and basically not talking to half my family. And it all started at my damn engagement party. I mean, who would have thought that a simple celebration could explode like that? I should start at the beginning, I guess. My name is Amelia, and I grew up in a relatively normal family until my mom remarried when I was like 15. My stepdad brought Victoria, his daughter from a previous marriage, who was 20 at the time. Victoria and I were never close. You know, she was much older and we always had completely different personalities, but we weren't enemies or anything like that either. She married young to a guy named Gregory. They had a son together named Benjamin, and although their marriage always seemed unstable, I tried to stay out of all that family drama. I met Dylan like 4 years ago at a work conference. He was 26 at the time. I was 23. And honestly, the chemistry was instant. He was smart, funny, ambitious, everything I was looking for in a partner. We moved in together after a year of dating and things were going incredibly well. We traveled together, we had plans for the future, we talked about having kids eventually, like the perfect relationship you see in movies, you know? When he proposed to me like 8 months ago, I obviously said yes without hesitating for a second. The thing is that Victoria and Gregory had gotten divorced a year before my engagement, and although I never knew all the details because, again, we weren't close, I heard rumors that Victoria had been unfaithful several times during the marriage. Benjamin was like 4 years old when they separated, and Gregory was still paying child support because legally he was his son, although the relationship between them was pretty tense. Victoria lived in her own apartment with Benjamin, worked part-time at a clothing store, and according to my mom, she was struggling financially but refused any kind of help from the family because she was too proud. When Dylan and I decided to have an engagement party, I invited all my family, including Victoria. I didn't expect her to come, honestly, because she almost never showed up at family events since her divorce, but I thought it would be rude not to invite her. She sent me a message saying she couldn't attend, something about Benjamin being sick or I don't know what, and I was like, okay, perfect. One less thing to worry about. The party was going to be at a small but nice event hall. Nothing too fancy but not casual either. About 50 guests between family and close friends. The day of the party came and everything was going perfect. My parents were there, Dylan's friends, my coworkers, everyone drinking, laughing, congratulating us. We were like halfway through the event. Dylan had just given a super sweet speech about how we met and our future plans, and I was standing there feeling literally like the happiest person in the world. And then the doors of the hall opened and Victoria appeared with Benjamin holding her hand, and the entire atmosphere changed in a second. I can't explain exactly what it was, but there was something in her body language, in the way she looked at Dylan and me, that gave me goosebumps immediately. She walked directly towards us, while all the conversation in the hall started to die down because everyone could feel that something was wrong. I remember Dylan turned pale, like completely white, the moment he saw her, and I thought that maybe he was surprised to see her there after she had said she wouldn't come. Benjamin looked confused. Poor thing. He was like 5 years old at that moment and clearly didn't understand why we were in that place. Victoria got to where we were and literally ignored me completely, looking only at Dylan, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "I need to talk to you now. It's about your son." And I was like, what? Because that didn't make any sense. Dylan didn't have kids. He had never been married before. He had never mentioned anything about having a child from a previous relationship. I tried to laugh thinking it was some kind of bad joke, and I told Victoria, "I think you're confused. Dylan doesn't have children." And she looked at me for the first time that night with an expression I can't describe as anything other than pure, malicious satisfaction, and pulled some papers out of her bag. She put them on the table where the engagement cake was and said, "These are the results of a paternity test I got 3 months ago. Dylan is Benjamin's biological father." And the silence that followed was probably the most awkward and horrible moment of my entire life. I could feel everyone staring at me, waiting for my reaction, and I simply couldn't process what I had just heard. I looked at Dylan hoping he would tell me this was crazy, that Victoria was lying, that there was some logical explanation, but he was just standing there with huge eyes, not saying absolutely anything. My mom and stepdad came running over. My stepdad trying to calm Victoria down and take her somewhere else. My mom asking me if I was okay. Some guests started leaving the hall because obviously the party had ended in the worst possible way. I grabbed the paternity test papers with shaking hands, and sure enough, there was Dylan's name, Benjamin's name, and a result that said 99.9% probability of paternity. I felt like the floor was opening up beneath my feet, like that moment in movies when everything goes into slow motion and you can only hear your heart beating in your ears. You know? Finally, Dylan spoke and said, "We need to talk in private. This isn't what it seems." And Victoria let out a bitter laugh and responded, "It isn't what it seems? You've been lying to her for years, Dylan." And I completely lost my composure and screamed, "Is someone going to explain to me what the hell is going on?" Benjamin started crying from the yelling, and my mom took him to another room. My best friend Sarah, who had come to the party, grabbed my arm and said, "Amelia, let's get out of here. You don't have to stay." But I couldn't move. I needed answers immediately. Dylan finally admitted, in front of the few guests who were still there because apparently we didn't have an ounce of privacy at that moment, that he had a one-night stand with Victoria like 5.5 years ago. He said it was before he and I met. That he was drunk. That it was a terrible mistake. That it never meant anything. But what he couldn't explain, what made me feel like my heart was being ripped out of my chest, was why he never told me. Victoria was my stepsister. He had met her at family dinners, events, gatherings, and never, not even once, mentioned they had been together. And more importantly, according to Victoria, he knew about Benjamin all this time. Dylan vehemently denied this last part, saying that Victoria had never told him she was pregnant, that she never contacted him, that he had no idea Benjamin could be his son until that moment. Victoria called him a liar and said she had sent him messages when she was pregnant, that he had blocked her and disappeared completely. The argument became so chaotic that finally my stepdad practically forced Victoria out of the hall. Her screaming that Dylan was going to pay for abandoning his son, Dylan insisting this was the first time he was hearing about this. I stayed there with Sarah holding me up because literally my legs weren't responding. All the guests left. Obviously. Some trying to console me on their way out. Others just leaving in silence because what are you supposed to say in a situation like that? My mom came back after calming Benjamin down and told me we should all go home, that this could be resolved later when everyone was calmer. But I didn't want to leave. I wanted answers. I wanted to understand how my perfect life had become this nightmare in a matter of minutes. Dylan tried to approach me, but I pushed him away and told him not to touch me. I asked him directly, "Is it true? Is Benjamin your son?" And he, with tears in his eyes, which was the first time I'd seen him cry in 4 years of dating, said he didn't know, that he needed to get his own paternity test to be sure, that the papers Victoria had shown could be fake. And I responded, "Really? That's your argument? That they're fake? Because if you had sex with her, which you just admitted, then it's perfectly possible he's your son." I ended up leaving with Sarah that night to her apartment because I couldn't even look at Dylan. My mom took my stepdad, and apparently Victoria also left with them to finish explaining the whole situation. I spent the whole night without sleeping, crying, throwing up from stress, trying to process everything. Sarah made me tea and hugged me while I repeated over and over, "How is this possible?" My phone wouldn't stop ringing with messages from Dylan begging me to let him explain. From my mom asking where I was. From some friends who had been at the party asking if I was okay. The next morning, with swollen eyes from crying so much and feeling like I'd been run over by a truck, I decided I needed more information before making any decision about my relationship. I called Gregory, Victoria's ex-husband, because if anyone could give me context on this craziness, it was him. Gregory and I had never been close, but he had always been nice to me at family gatherings. When I told him what had happened at my engagement party, there was a long silence on the other side of the phone, and then he said something that left me frozen. He had always suspected Benjamin wasn't his biological son. Gregory explained to me that Victoria had been unfaithful throughout their entire marriage, that he had ignored the signs because he wanted to believe they could make it work, but that when Benjamin was born, the baby didn't look like him at all. He said Victoria had flatly refused to get a paternity test when he suggested it, that it had caused huge fights, and that eventually he had dropped the subject because he didn't want Benjamin to grow up thinking his father doubted him. But now, with this new information about Dylan, Gregory said he was going to sue Victoria and demand an official paternity test because if Benjamin wasn't his son, he had been paying child support for a child who wasn't his for years. The next few days were complete chaos. Gregory got the paternity test, and the results confirmed what he had suspected. He wasn't Benjamin's biological father. He filed a lawsuit against Victoria for paternity fraud and demanded she return all the money he had paid in child support, which according to him added up to like $50,000 over the last 5 years or so. Victoria, for her part, was constantly calling my mom, crying that her life was ruined, that Gregory was going to leave her on the street, that she needed Dylan to assume his responsibility as a father. And Dylan finally agreed to get the paternity test after I pressured him for days. I think part of him still hoped the results would say he wasn't the father, that somehow this was all a giant mistake and we could go back to our normal life. But when the results came 2 weeks later, they confirmed what Victoria had said. Dylan was Benjamin's biological father with 99.9% certainty. And that basically destroyed any hope I had of saving our relationship. I'm not going to lie. The weeks after that were the worst of my life. I officially moved out of the apartment I shared with Dylan and went to live with Sarah while I looked for my own place. Dylan begged me to listen to him, to give him a chance to explain, for us to go to couples therapy. My parents, especially my mom, pressured me to forgive him. Because according to her, everyone makes mistakes, and Dylan didn't know about Benjamin, so technically, he hadn't lied to me during our relationship. But I couldn't get over the fact that he had slept with my stepsister and never told me, that he had seen her at family gatherings for years and never mentioned anything, that he only admitted the truth when he had no other choice. Meanwhile, the situation with Victoria got worse. CPS, Child Protective Services, got involved because apparently, paternity fraud is serious enough for them to investigate whether the environment is safe for the child. There was a complete investigation of Victoria's life, her financial situation, her history of lies and manipulation, and eventually they determined Benjamin should be temporarily removed from her custody. My mom and stepdad got temporary custody of the boy, which was a whole additional nightmare because Benjamin was obviously confused and scared, asking why he couldn't be with his mom. And then, because apparently the universe decided we hadn't had enough drama, something even more disturbing came to light. During the CPS investigation, they discovered that Victoria had not only lied to Gregory about paternity, but had also been collecting child support from another man at the same time. Yes, you read that right. Another guy named Thomas, who Victoria had convinced that he was also Benjamin's father. Thomas had been paying money for years without knowing Gregory was also paying, without knowing neither of them was actually the child's father. When all this information came out, I honestly couldn't even process the magnitude of Victoria's lies. This woman had been defrauding 2 men simultaneously, collecting money from both for the same child, while the real father, Dylan, wasn't paying anything, because supposedly he didn't know the child existed. And worst of all is that Benjamin, this poor 5-year-old boy, was an innocent victim in all this mess created by his mother, Dylan. And I tried couples therapy as a last effort to save our relationship. I wanted to believe we could overcome it, that the love we felt for each other was strong enough to survive this crisis. We went to like 6 sessions with a therapist who specialized in infidelity and trust issues. Dylan insisted in every session that he didn't know about Benjamin, that Victoria never contacted him during her pregnancy, that if he had known, he would have been part of the child's life from the beginning. The therapist had us do communication exercises, asked us to write our feelings, to imagine a future together with Benjamin in our lives. But I couldn't do it. Every time I looked at Dylan, I saw someone who had slept with my stepsister, who had kept that secret for years, and now had a son with her. How are you supposed to build a future with someone under those circumstances? How do you plan a wedding knowing your stepsister is going to be there with the son she had with your fiancé? How do you have your own children knowing this half-sibling already exists, who shares DNA? It was too complicated, too twisted, too painful. Things came to a breaking point like 2 months after the engagement party, when Victoria showed up at my apartment, well, Sarah's apartment, where I was living. I have no idea how she got the address, but she knocked on the door on a Tuesday afternoon when Sarah was at work, and I was trying to work from home. I opened the door thinking it was an Amazon delivery or something, and there she was, looking terrible, honestly, with dark circles, unwashed hair, wrinkled clothes, clearly not sleeping or eating well. She asked me to let her in, that she needed to talk to me. My first instinct was to slam the door in her face, but something in her expression made me hesitate. She looked desperate, broken, completely different from the woman who had walked into my engagement party with that triumphant attitude. I let her in against my better judgment and we sat in Sarah's living room, keeping distance between us, and Victoria started talking. She told me she was sorry, that she never wanted to ruin my life, that she only wanted Dylan to assume responsibility for Benjamin. I asked her directly, "Why did you wait 5 years? Why did you ruin my engagement party instead of talking to him privately? Why did you lie to Gregory and Thomas about paternity?" Her answer was basically that everything had gotten out of control. That when she got pregnant, she wasn't sure who the father was because she had been with several men around the same time, that she picked Gregory because he was her husband, and it was the most convenient option. She said that when Dylan showed up at a family dinner years later, it was like seeing a ghost because she recognized certain traits of Benjamin in him, especially the eyes and face shape. According to Victoria, she confronted Dylan privately after that dinner, told him she believed Benjamin was his son, and he completely ghosted her, blocked her number, refused to respond to her messages. This completely contradicted what Dylan had told me, that he had no idea about Benjamin until the engagement party. I called Dylan immediately while Victoria was still there and demanded he come to Sarah's apartment right now. He arrived like 20 minutes later, clearly nervous seeing Victoria there, and I told both of them I was going to hear the complete truth, or I was ending things with Dylan that same day and never talking to either of them again. I needed to know what had really happened, who was lying, because someone obviously wasn't telling the whole truth. Dylan sat on the couch with his head in his hands and finally, after what seemed like hours but was probably only minutes, he confessed. He said Victoria was right, that she had contacted him like 3 years ago during one of the first family dinners he attended with me. Victoria had shown him pictures of Benjamin and told him she believed he was his son. Dylan admitted he could see the resemblance, that internally he panicked, but that he decided to ignore it because he was building a life with me, because Victoria was married to Gregory at the time, because it was easier to pretend nothing had happened. When Victoria insisted and asked him to get a paternity test, Dylan blocked her and basically disappeared from her life. He kept coming to family events with me, acting like nothing had happened, while Victoria dealt alone with the suspicion that her son wasn't her husband's but her stepsister's boyfriend's. And when Victoria and Gregory got divorced, Dylan thought he had finally dodged the bullet, that Victoria would leave him alone. But then came the engagement, and I guess Victoria decided enough was enough with lies and secrets, so she destroyed everything in the most public and dramatic way possible. Hearing this confession was like having my soul ripped from my body. Dylan hadn't just lied about not knowing about Benjamin, he had lied for years, had looked at Victoria at family gatherings knowing what he knew, had planned a future with me knowing he had this huge secret that was eventually going to explode. I got up from the couch, took off the engagement ring I was still wearing because a pathetic part of me had been hoping everything was a misunderstanding, and threw it in his lap. I told him we were done, to pack all my stuff that was still at his apartment and leave it with Sarah, that I didn't want to see him again. Dylan cried, begged me, said we could get through this, that he would go to more therapy, that he would do whatever was necessary, but I was done, like completely broken and exhausted and furious. Victoria was also crying at that point, saying she was sorry, that she never imagined things would end like this, and I told them both to get out of my life, that they had hurt me enough, that I needed to heal and couldn't do it with them around. They left, and I collapsed on the couch, called Sarah from work, and told her everything, and she came home immediately to be with me. The next few months were an endless and draining legal process. Gregory won his lawsuit against Victoria for paternity fraud, and the judge ordered her to return all the money he had paid in child support, plus interest and legal costs, totaling like $65,000. Thomas also sued and won a similar case, although his amount was less because he had started paying more recently, like $20,000 or so. Victoria obviously didn't have that money, so the judge established a payment plan and also ordered her to do community service for fraud. The custody battle for Benjamin was even more complicated. Dylan, as the confirmed biological father, had the legal right to fight for custody, but the judge took into account that he had intentionally abandoned the child during the first 5 years of his life, so that worked against him. Victoria had temporarily lost custody due to the fraud, and although she could eventually recover it, it was going to require parenting classes, psychological evaluations, CPS supervision, a whole long process. Gregory had no legal rights because he wasn't the biological father, and his marriage to Victoria had ended. But then Thomas, who had technically been a victim of the same fraud as Gregory, but had been in Benjamin's life more consistently, petitioned for custody. It turns out Thomas, although he had only been part of Benjamin's life for like 2 years, had developed a real bond with the boy. He took Benjamin to his soccer practices, picked him up from school when Victoria worked, spent time with him regularly. And Benjamin, according to the social worker's report, referred to Thomas as Daddy Thomas, and clearly had an emotional attachment to him. The judge eventually decided the best thing for Benjamin was to live with Thomas, with supervised visits with Victoria, and the option for Dylan to establish a relationship with the child if he decided to. My parents were devastated to return Benjamin, especially my mom, who had gotten very attached to him during the months she took care of him. Victoria was furious with the decision, but there wasn't much she could do legally given her history of fraud and lies. Dylan sent me a message asking if I thought he should try to be part of Benjamin's life, and I didn't even respond because it wasn't my problem anymore. I eventually found my own apartment, a small one-bedroom that I can afford with my salary, and moved there like 4 months after the engagement party disaster. Sarah helped me move and told me she was proud of me for rebuilding my life, but honestly, I didn't feel proud of anything. I just felt tired and betrayed, and like the last 4 years of my life had been one giant lie. I stopped going to family events because every time I saw my mom and stepdad, they mentioned Victoria or Dylan or Benjamin, and I simply couldn't deal with that. My mom calls me often, trying to convince me to forgive Victoria because she's family, that everyone makes mistakes, that Benjamin needs a united family. But I don't owe Victoria anything. She destroyed my life, my engagement, my trust in people. My stepdad is a bit more understanding, says he gets why I'm angry, but also reminds me Victoria is his daughter, and he can't just abandon her. So basically, I've kept distance from my parents too, which is sad but necessary for my mental health. Dylan tried to contact me several times during the first few months, but eventually he stopped. I heard through mutual friends that he's paying child support for Benjamin now, that he sees the boy occasionally under supervision, but that he hasn't established a real father-son relationship. I don't know how that makes me feel. I guess I'm not surprised Dylan isn't really committed to being a father, considering he spent years avoiding it. Part of me feels sorry for Benjamin. Growing up knowing your biological father basically didn't want you during the first 5 years of your life must be devastating, but it's not my responsibility to worry about that anymore. Victoria was finally sentenced for the paternity fraud. No prison time, fortunately, because the judge took into account she was a single mother struggling financially. But yes, a sentence that includes the payments I mentioned plus 200 hours of community service and probation for 3 years. Apparently, she's working 2 jobs now, trying to pay what she owes, living in a tiny apartment, seeing Benjamin only twice a week under supervision. I'm not going to lie. A small petty part of me feels satisfied she's facing consequences for her actions, but mostly I just feel empty. Like 2 weeks ago, 6 months after everything exploded, I accidentally ran into Dylan at a supermarket. It was super awkward, both of us trying to decide whether to greet each other or ignore each other, and eventually he approached and asked me how I was. I told him I was fine, rebuilding my life, and he told me he was sorry, that he still thought about me every day, that he wished he could turn back time and do things differently. And I just responded, "Me too," and kept walking, because what else is there to say in a situation like that? Now I'm here, 27 years old, single, living alone, trying to rebuild my life from scratch. I started individual therapy like 3 months ago, and that's helping. I guess. My therapist says I need to forgive, not for Victoria or Dylan, but for myself, to be able to let go of all this anger and resentment I'm carrying. But honestly, I don't know if I'm ready for that yet. Like, the pain is still very fresh. The betrayal still hurts every time I think about it. I've been focusing on my work, spending time with friends who have no connection to all this drama, trying to rediscover who I am outside of being Dylan's girlfriend or Victoria's stepsister. It's weird rebuilding an identity after everything you thought about your life turns out to be false, you know? But I'm trying. One day at a time. I still have bad days where I cry in the shower or can't get out of bed. But I also have good days where I laugh with Sarah or enjoy my morning coffee or feel grateful to be out of that toxic relationship based on lies. I don't know what's going to happen with Dylan and Benjamin, if they're eventually going to have a real father-son relationship, or if Dylan is going to remain an absent figure who only pays child support. I don't know if Victoria is going to be able to recover full custody of Benjamin or if Thomas is going to raise him permanently. I don't know if someday I'm going to be able to forgive any of them, or if I'm just going to maintain this distance forever. What I do know is that I deserve something better than what I had, that I deserve honesty and respect and a relationship that isn't built on secrets and betrayals. My best friend Sarah, who has literally been my salvation through all this, told me something last week that stuck with me. She said that sometimes the worst things that happen to us end up being blessings in disguise because they get us out of situations that weren't right for us, even when we didn't know it at the time. And maybe she's right. Maybe marrying Dylan would have been a giant mistake. Maybe this had to happen so I could see who he really was. But that doesn't make it hurt any less. You know? 6 months later, I'm still processing everything, still healing, still learning to trust again. And I guess that's enough for now.